The seat assignment had been made weeks in advance, printed on a boarding pass that slid out of a kiosk at JFK International Airport, without ceremony, without fanfare, without any indication that the number printed beside the letter A in row 4 would become the first domino in a sequence that would bring an empire to its knees. No one in Terminal 7 that Tuesday morning knew this. The gate agents were focused on their screens. The flight crew was running their pre-departure checklist. And Angela Whitmore, CEO and public face of Whitmore Consumer Group, was standing in the priority boarding lane with the quiet, coiled energy of a woman who had never once in her professional life been made to wait for anything she wanted. She was 43 years old, dressed in a charcoal Armani blazer over a cream silk blouse, her dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck in a way that managed to look both effortless and deliberate. Her carry-on bag cost more than most people's monthly rent. She wore no jewelry except a slim platinum watch on her left wrist, because she had long ago decided that understated was a different kind of power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Or so she believed. In truth, Angela Whitmore had spent the better part of 2 decades announcing herself in ways she could not see. Those who worked beneath her knew this well. They had learned to read the particular set of her jaw that meant someone was about to be spoken to in a way they would not forget. They had cataloged the specific tone she used when a quarterly projection came back lower than expected. Not raised exactly, but flattened, stripped of any warmth, each word arriving like a door being closed firmly in a face. She did not shout in boardrooms. She did not need to. The temperature simply dropped, and everyone in the room understood that they were standing in a landscape she controlled entirely. Her assistant, a 26-year-old named Priya, who had lasted longer than any of her predecessors, kept a running list on her phone of things she needed to have ready at all times: a spare phone charger, a specific brand of sparkling water, a printed copy of whatever Angela might need to read on any given flight, because Angela did not trust airline Wi-Fi and would not wait for a connection. Priya was not on this flight. Angela was traveling alone to Los Angeles for what had been described to her team as a routine strategy session. In 3 days, there would be a meeting at the company's West Coast offices, a meeting that Angela had been preparing for with the focused intensity she brought to every significant business moment. The agenda she had reviewed the night before was 14 pages long. She had made notes in the margins in red ink. She was ready. What she was not ready for was the financial reality that had been quietly accumulating behind the surface of Whitmore Consumer Group for the past 18 months. The company's retail division had been underperforming. A product line relaunch had failed to generate the projected consumer response. 2 regional markets had contracted. These were not secrets, they were visible in the quarterly filings, but Angela had a gift for narrating around bad news, for placing unflattering figures inside a larger story that always curved, eventually, toward optimism. The board had accepted this narration longer than it should have. That, too, was changing. Angela did not know that yet. She thought she was flying to Los Angeles to run a meeting. She was actually flying toward a reckoning that had been in motion for longer than she realized, set in motion by a man she had never met face to face, who at this moment was sitting very quietly in seat 4A, reading a document on a slim tablet, wearing a dark suit that fit him well, but carried no particular label visible to the casual eye. She almost walked past him. Then she looked at her boarding pass, looked at the row number, looked at the seat, and stopped. The man in 4A was black, somewhere in his late 50s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have spent a long time learning not to react to things that once would have shaken them. He did not look up when Angela stopped beside him. He was reading something with the focused attention of a person for whom reading was not a leisure activity, but a working one. His suit was dark navy. His watch was plain. He wore no rings. He occupied his space calmly, without expanding into it, the way some first-class passengers do to signal their comfort with luxury. He simply sat there, present and self-contained, like a man who needed nothing from the environment around him. Angela looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and looked for a flight attendant. She did not immediately make a scene. That would come later. In those first few seconds, she was simply conducting an evaluation, the kind she ran constantly and unconsciously. ranking every person she encountered according to an internal ledger she had built over decades in business. The currency of this ledger was power, money, and status, and the man in 4A registered, by her accounting, as someone who had wandered into the wrong section of the aircraft. The suit was too plain. The tablet was not a brand she associated with wealth. He had no visible attendants, no one hovering nearby with a garment bag or a briefcase. He looked, to Angela Whitmore's experienced eye, like a man who had perhaps been upgraded from economy and had not yet fully acclimated to the surroundings. She located a flight attendant named Diane, who was arranging something in the galley, and spoke to her in the voice she used for service staff. Not unkind, exactly, but clipped, efficient. The voice of someone for whom the interaction was a transaction to be completed quickly, so that more important things could be attended to. She said there seemed to be an issue with her seating assignment, and she wondered whether an alternative might be arranged. Diane said she would check on it, and went to look at the manifest, and came back a moment later with the information that the flight was completely full and that seat 4B was in fact Angela's assigned seat. Angela looked at 4A again. The man had still not looked up. She turned back to Diane and said, more quietly but more precisely, that she would appreciate being moved away from her current seat assignment. Diane asked if there was a specific concern. Angela's jaw tightened in the way that Priya, had she been there, would have recognized immediately as the precursor to something no one in the vicinity was going to enjoy. Angela said that she simply preferred not to sit there, and that she expected the airline to be able to accommodate a reasonable request from a first-class passenger who spent a considerable amount of money on tickets each year. Diane was experienced. She had been a flight attendant for 16 years, and had navigated a great many difficult conversations at altitude. She said, very politely, that she understood, but that there were truly no alternative seats available in the business cabin, and that she was sorry she couldn't help. That was when Angela's voice changed. It did not become louder immediately. It became harder, stripped of its earlier smooth efficiency, edged now with something sharper. She said that she had not paid the price of a first-class transcon ticket to sit beside someone who clearly did not belong in this section of the aircraft. She said it with the particular confidence of a person who had never been told, in any serious way, that she was wrong about something. Several passengers in nearby seats had gone quiet. The man in 4A had still not looked up from his tablet, but he was no longer reading. His eyes were still. His hands were still. He was listening. Angela turned slightly, addressing no one in particular, and everyone simultaneously, the way powerful people sometimes do when they want an audience without wanting to appear to want one. She said that standards existed for a reason. She said that she had worked her entire life to be in a position where she did not have to compromise on her environment. She said these things at a volume that was not quite shouting, but that carried clearly through the forward cabin, over the low sound of the aircraft's engines, into the ears of every person sitting within 4 rows. The man in 4A set his tablet on his tray table and looked at her for the first time. He had dark, quiet eyes. He did not look angry. He looked, if anything, slightly tired in the way that people look when they have encountered a thing many times before and have long since moved past the phase of being surprised by it. He said, with the measured calm of someone who has chosen his words deliberately, that he thought perhaps she might want to sit down. He said it gently. He said it without any particular challenge in his voice. The way you might speak to someone who is about to do something they will later regret, offering them a quiet exit before the moment passed. This was precisely the wrong thing to say to Angela Whitmore. She turned to face him fully. Her voice climbed one register. She said she had not asked for his opinion. She said she did not know who he thought he was, but that she was the CEO of a major consumer brand, and that she expected a certain level of environment to be maintained in the spaces she occupied. She said, and this was the moment. The forward cabin went completely silent. The moment 3 people reached for their phones. The moment Diane, the flight attendant, closed her eyes briefly, in a way that suggested she was deciding something. She said that she was not going to spend a 5-hour flight sitting next to someone who should not be in this cabin. The man looked at her for a moment. Then he said, calmly and without malice, I also work in your industry. Angela blinked. Then she laughed a short, disbelieving sound. She said that was very interesting. She asked Diane to please note the exchange for the airline's records, and sat down in 4B, angling her body away from the man in 4A in a way that was meant to communicate, without any further words, that the matter was settled, and that she intended to proceed as though the seat beside her were empty. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it in stages, the way you learn the shape of something in the dark. First the outline, then the detail, then the full terrible clarity of what you are looking at. His name was Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed did not respond to Angela's laugh. He picked up his tablet, settled back into his seat, and returned to the document he had been reading before she arrived. If her contempt had landed anywhere on him, it did not show. He had the quality rare and somewhat unnerving in people who possess it of genuine indifference to the opinions of those who had not yet earned the right to form one. This was not arrogance. It was the product of a specific kind of experience, of having spent decades in a world that judged him by standards applied to no one else, and having come through that experience, not hardened, but clarified. He knew what he was worth. He had known it for a long time. He did not need Angela Whitmore to confirm it. He was 61 years old. He had grown up in Baltimore, the second of 4 children, in a house where money was a conversation that happened in low voices late at night between parents who were both working double shifts and still coming up short. His father drove a delivery truck, and his mother cleaned offices in a downtown building whose lobby she was not permitted to enter through the main entrance. He had absorbed these facts as a child, the way children absorb the facts of their particular world, not as injustices requiring immediate address, but as the given conditions of a landscape, the weather of a life. It was only later, after he had moved far enough away to look back at those conditions with some distance, that he understood what they had actually cost. He had received a partial scholarship to study economics at a state university, and had worked the rest of his way through with jobs that left him tired in ways a 20-year-old body shouldn't feel. He had graduated near the top of his class and gone directly into finance, arriving on Wall Street at a moment when the industry was not especially interested in welcoming people who looked like him, and had spent the next several years being underestimated with a consistency that would have broken a lesser person. It did not break Marcus Reed. It educated him. The education was specific. He learned early that being right was not sufficient, that in rooms where people had already decided what you were capable of, being right meant almost nothing unless you could make it undeniable, unless you could construct the evidence of your competence in a form that left no interpretive space, that foreclosed the preferred alternative of crediting your success to luck or accident or the charity of people above you. He learned to be patient in meetings where his ideas were ignored, and then restated by someone else and received with interest. He learned to document everything. He learned to build track records so clean and so well documented that dismissing them required more effort than acknowledging them, and he learned to wait for the moment when the effort required to dismiss him exceeded the willingness to try. He learned, most importantly, that the people who underestimated him were giving him something not intentionally, not generously, but effectively they were giving him the advantage of invisibility, of being able to observe and prepare and move, without triggering the defensive calculations that activate when powerful people feel genuinely threatened. He had leveraged this invisibility into 30 years of building. Patient, methodical, strategic, acquiring significant stakes in companies across multiple sectors, always through layers of legal representation that kept his name out of any conversation where it might be a distraction. He was not famous. He did not want to be. He sat on no public boards and gave no public interviews and attended no events where his presence might generate photographs. He was, by any serious measure of the word, extraordinarily wealthy, and virtually no one, outside a very specific circle of lawyers, accountants, and fellow investors, would have recognized his face. He owned, through his investment group, 75% of the outstanding shares of Whitmore Consumer Group. He had acquired the position over a period of 4 years, beginning when he identified the company as an undervalued asset with a fixable operational problem. The operational problem, it had become increasingly clear to him over the past 18 months, was seated beside him now, turned pointedly away, radiating the kind of self-satisfaction that tends to precede a very steep fall. He returned to the document on his tablet. It was a detailed internal performance analysis of the company's regional distribution network. He had 3 more to get through before they landed. Angela Whitmore did not look at Marcus Reed for the first 40 minutes of the flight. She worked through her own materials, the 14-page agenda, several emails she had composed on her laptop during boarding, a set of talking points prepared by her communications team for the Los Angeles strategy session. She was good at this, at the focused execution of professional tasks, and for a while the activity was enough to insulate her from the ambient awareness that the man beside her was also working, also focused, also in the middle of something that had the texture of serious professional engagement. She told herself he was probably preparing a pitch deck for some mid-level position he was hoping to advance. She did not let herself look at his screen. It was the airline's wireless service that eventually broke through her focus. She was trying to connect, and the connection was slow, and while she was waiting, she set her laptop aside and turned slightly not toward Marcus, but toward the window, and in the peripheral vision of that small movement, she saw something on his tablet screen that she had not expected to see. It was a chart. A specific kind of chart, with a specific color scheme and a specific typeface that she knew because she had approved it herself 2 years earlier, when her marketing team had standardized the visual language used in all internal Whitmore Consumer Group reports. The colors were a particular shade of deep blue and warm gray that the brand consultants had called sophisticated and distinctive, and that Angela had agreed were exactly right. She saw those colors for a fraction of a second, and then looked away, telling herself she had been mistaken. She was not mistaken. She looked again, this time with less pretense of looking elsewhere. The chart on Marcus Reed's tablet was an internal Whitmore Consumer Group document. She could see the header, a specific format used only in materials prepared for senior leadership. She could see the document had multiple pages. She could see, even at the angle she was viewing it, that it contained data she recognized. Sales figures, regional breakdowns, numbers from the past quarter. She turned to face him directly. She said, carefully, that he appeared to be looking at something that belonged to her company. She said it with the authority she always used for accusatory statements, not raising her voice, making the accusation itself do the heavy work. She said that she was curious how he had obtained documents that were clearly marked for internal distribution only. Marcus looked at her. He did not look caught. He looked, if anything, mildly patient. He said, "I have the right to view them." Angela stared at him. She said that was not possible. She said those materials were proprietary and that he should explain himself immediately. Marcus held her gaze for a moment with the even, unhurried steadiness of a man who has been asked to explain himself many times and has long since stopped finding the request particularly interesting. Then he said that there would be time for all of that, and returned to his reading. Angela reached for her phone. The Wi-Fi had finally connected. She pulled up her contacts and called Marcus Haynes, her chief operating officer, who picked up on the third ring. She spoke quietly, efficiently, with the careful diction of someone who is managing a situation that has not yet fully declared itself. She described what she had seen. She said she needed him to find out how an outside individual might have obtained restricted internal documents, and she said it quickly because she could feel the conversation had the wrong shape. Haynes's responses were coming back too slowly, too carefully, each one carrying the particular texture of a person who is deciding what to say rather than simply saying it. He asked her what the man's name was. She said she didn't know. There was a pause. Haynes said, "Could she describe him?" She did. Another pause, longer this time. Haynes asked, "Is his name Marcus Reed?" Angela felt something shift inside her chest. A small, cold, unfamiliar sensation, the first edge of a very large truth. She said yes. She said, "How did he know that?" The pause on the other end of the line lasted long enough that she said Haynes's name again, with a sharpness meant to move things forward. And Haynes said carefully, in the voice of a person who is about to deliver news that will change the conversation in a way from which it cannot be changed back. He said that Marcus Reed was a name she needed to know. She pressed him. He said he was sorry, but he thought this was a conversation she needed to have in person, and that perhaps the man beside her was the right person to have it with. Then he said, before she could respond, "Angela, he's the primary investor. He's been the primary investor for 4 years." She ended the call. She sat very still for a moment. Outside the window, the American Southwest was spread below them in its vast, in different geometry of brown and rust and pale gold. The aircraft moved through the air with the smooth, engineered certainty of a thing that does not concern itself with the internal states of the people it carries. Angela Whitmore sat in seat 4B, and allowed, for the first time in years, the possibility that she had made a serious mistake. She turned to look at Marcus Reed. He was still reading. He had not looked up during her phone call. He showed no sign of having heard any of it. She was still trying to formulate a question, something controlled, something that would allow her to understand the situation without fully surrendering her position, when a man from across the aisle leaned forward slightly and spoke in a low voice that was nonetheless audible enough to carry. He said he was sorry to interrupt, but he wanted to make sure he'd heard correctly. He said his name was David Calloway, and that he had spent 12 years in institutional investment before moving to advisory work, and he said, looking at Marcus, with the recognition of someone identifying a landmark they had seen only in photographs, he said he believed he recognized the man in 4A. Marcus looked up at Calloway. A brief, acknowledging look. The look of a private man who has been seen and is choosing, in this particular moment, to allow it. Calloway said, "You're Marcus Reed, Reed Capital Partners." The forward cabin shifted. It was not a loud or dramatic shift. No one stood up. No one said anything, but the quality of the silence changed, became attentive in a way that silence does when the room has recalibrated its understanding of who is actually in it. Angela looked at Marcus. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost some of its certainty. She asked if what Calloway had said was accurate. She asked it with the careful, controlled steadiness of someone trying to maintain a posture that is already compromised. Marcus set the tablet down on his tray table with the quiet finality of a man setting down something he no longer needs to hold. He said yes. He confirmed his name. He confirmed that Reed Capital Partners held a controlling interest in several consumer sector companies. He said all of this, without emphasis, without drama, with the flat straightforwardness of a person reciting facts that have always been facts and will continue to be facts, regardless of how they are received. Angela's face changed. It was a small change, barely visible, the kind of change that only someone watching closely would have registered. But the flight attendant, Diane, who was standing at the edge of the galley pretending to review something on her clipboard, saw it. David Calloway across the aisle saw it. Several other passengers, who had spent the past hour watching a woman humiliate a stranger and were now watching the stranger turn out to be something else entirely, saw it. Calloway said quietly, filling in what Marcus had not said. "His fund owns most of your company." Angela did not respond immediately. She turned to Marcus. She said, and something had left her voice now, some fundamental note of superiority that had been present from the moment she boarded the aircraft. She said she had not understood who he was. She said she wanted to apologize for what had happened earlier. She said she had made assumptions that she now understood were incorrect, and that she was sorry for the way she had spoken to him. Marcus looked at her for a moment. He looked at her the way a person looks at something when they are deciding not what to feel about it, but what to do with it. He said, "If I had no shares in your company, would that apology exist?" Angela opened her mouth. No answer came. The forward cabin was completely quiet. Outside, 37,000 feet of empty air separated the aircraft from the ground, and for those few seconds the plane might as well have been standing still, suspended in a moment that every person in those first few rows understood they were going to remember. Marcus turned back to his work. He did not say anything further. He did not look at her again for the remainder of the flight. The meeting in Los Angeles had been called by Marcus Reed. Angela did not learn this fully until the car from the airport pulled up in front of the Whitmore Consumer Group West Coast offices, and she saw the configuration of vehicles already gathered in the parking structure. Not the usual arrangement for a strategy session, not the modest cluster of company cars and rented sedans that attended a routine internal meeting, but a small fleet of black SUVs that she associated, with a cold precision of recognition, with the kind of institutional representation that arrived when something significant was being decided. She stepped out of the car and stood in the California morning light and understood, for the first time, the full shape of what was coming. She walked into the building and was directed to the main conference room. Marcus Reed was already there. He had somehow arrived before her. There had been no car that she could see, no visible logistics, and he was standing at the far end of the table, speaking quietly with the company's general counsel. 3 members of the board of directors were seated. 2 more appeared in the doorway behind Angela. The CFO was there, the head of operations, people who should not have been at a strategy session, people whose presence in the same room at the same time had a specific and unmistakable meaning. When Angela entered, the room acknowledged her. People looked up. No one said anything. Marcus finished his conversation with the general counsel and took a seat at the head of the table, not Angela's usual position, not the spot she occupied in every meeting that happened in this building. And Angela looked at that and felt the ground shift beneath her in a way that no amount of preparation could have addressed, because no preparation had accounted for this. The meeting began without preamble. Marcus spoke with the same quality of contained efficiency that he had brought to every interaction since she first saw him on the aircraft. He laid out the situation with a clarity that was almost kind in its precision, not brutal, not dramatic, simply clear. The company had been underperforming for 6 consecutive quarters. Projections that had been presented to the board had systematically exceeded actuals. The gap between what had been communicated and what was real had become too significant to continue to attribute to market conditions. The board had been in communication with Reed Capital Partners for several months. They were here today to have a conversation about leadership. Angela sat through this. She did not interrupt. She had spent her entire career in rooms where she was the most powerful person present, and she was discovering, in real time, what it felt like to be in a room where she was not. She did not yet know what to do with that. She was still searching for the angle, for the narrative, for the reframe that would restructure the situation in terms more favorable to her position, when Marcus asked the room if they could play a short piece of video. A laptop was opened. The screen at the end of the room flickered on. What followed was 2 minutes and 40 seconds of footage, recorded by a passenger's phone on the morning's flight footage that was already, because this was the world that existed now, circulating beyond the walls of that conference room, beyond the city of Los Angeles, beyond any ability to contain it. The footage showed Angela Whitmore standing in the forward cabin of a commercial aircraft in her expensive blazer, speaking with escalating contempt about the man seated beside her. It showed her voice rising. It showed her face the set of her jaw, the displacement in her expression. It showed Marcus Reed sitting very still and very quiet, looking at nothing in particular while she spoke. And it showed, with the merciless clarity of a smartphone camera held at the right angle, every single person in that forward cabin watching. No one in the conference room said anything when it ended. Angela looked at the blank screen. The room looked at Angela. In the silence between these two things, something irrevocable occurred. Not an action, but a recognition, shared simultaneously by everyone present, of a fact that had existed long before this morning and was now simply visible. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Holden, who had been on the board for 7 years and who had raised concerns about Angela's management style at 3 separate meetings over the past 2 years, only to find those concerns accommodated and moved past, spoke first. She said, carefully, that she did not think this was an isolated incident. She said that the conduct in the video was consistent with reports she had received from multiple members of the company's leadership team over an extended period. She said the word culture deliberately and let it sit in the room. 2 other directors followed her. They did not raise their voices. They did not need to. What they said was precise and documented and grounded in specific incidents that Angela recognized. Incidents she had not thought anyone above her pay grade was paying attention to. Incidents she had narrated past or attributed to personality differences, or explained away in the smooth, practiced manner she had always used to shape inconvenient information into something more manageable. One director described a product team that had stopped bringing innovative proposals to senior leadership because the response, when the proposals were imperfect, had become too costly to absorb. Another described turnover in the marketing division, 5 senior hires in 2 years, all departing with the same general account of the environment they had left. A third described survey data from the company's most recent internal culture assessment, data that had been presented to Angela in a summary form that did not reflect its full severity, because the people responsible for the summary had learned, through experience, what information Angela was and was not willing to receive. The incidents had been cataloged, They were here now, in this room, and no narrative in Angela's arsenal was equal to them. Marcus listened. He did not add to what the board members said. When they had finished, he leaned forward slightly and spoke in a voice that was not unkind, but that carried in every word the weight of a decision that had already been made. He said the question before them was not whether change was necessary. It was what form that change should take, and how to protect the organization and the people in it while making it. He said he was not interested in public destruction. He said the company had significant value and significant people working within it, and that the path forward should reflect that. He outlined two options. The first was a voluntary resignation, structured in a way that would allow Angela to retain certain professional dignities, a mutually agreed statement, a transition period, a framework that acknowledged her contributions, while acknowledging that a new direction was required. The second was a formal board vote to remove her, which would be recorded, documented, and become part of the public record of the company's governance history. He asked which she would prefer. Angela sat with this for a long moment. She had come into this building 3 hours ago, prepared to run a meeting, prepared to manage her board, prepared to move her agenda forward, with the confident momentum she had always brought to every room she walked into. She was sitting now with a full awareness that the room had changed, that it had perhaps been changing for a long time without her knowing, or without her choosing to know. The strategy she had relied on, the performance of control and certainty that had carried her through 2 decades of leadership, required a specific kind of environment to function. It required people who were uncertain of their own ground. In this room, today, she was the only one who was uncertain. She thought about the flight attendant Diane, who had been nothing but professional in the face of being spoken to like a problem to be managed. She thought about Priya, her assistant, who came in every morning, already braced for whatever version of Angela was going to inhabit that day. She thought about the marketing director she had humiliated in a meeting 3 months ago over a font choice, and the regional manager she had dressed down in front of his entire team, and the dozen other moments she had not thought of, since the moment they occurred, because she did not keep inventory of the effects she had on other people. They were there, she realized. They had been there, all along. They were simply not hers to manage. She asked for a pen. Someone passed one across the table. She signed the document that the general counsel slid toward her, a brief, clean resignation letter, drafted in language that she understood was generous, given the circumstances, and set the pen down, and looked at the table for a long moment. The room was very quiet. It was the particular quiet of people who are bearing witness to something they know is significant, and who understand that significance requires no narration from them. Angela looked at her name on the paper. She had signed her name tens of thousands of times on contracts, on approvals, on the various instruments of authority that accumulate around executive leadership, and each prior signature had been an assertion of something, a claiming of territory, a mark that said, "This thing passes through me, and I am the one it passes through." This signature was different. This one was a release. She sat with that for the few seconds it took to register, and then she nodded once, stood up, and walked toward the door. Marcus said her name. She stopped. She turned. He was still seated at the far end of the table. He said he wondered if she would give him a few minutes before she left the building. He said it without formality, without any particular edge. A request, not a demand. She waited in a small conference room off the main corridor. She did not know what she was waiting for. She sat with her hands on the table and looked at the wall and tried to locate, inside herself, the anger that was her most reliable resource, the emotion she had turned to in every difficult professional moment, and found that it was not available to her in the way it usually was. It was there, distantly, but beneath it was something she was less practiced at identifying. She sat with it and did not try to name it. Marcus came in 15 minutes later and sat down across from her. He did not bring anyone with him. He set nothing on the table. He was simply there, in his plain navy suit, with his quiet eyes and his complete, somewhat disorienting stillness. She said she assumed he wanted to discuss the transition timeline. She said it because it was a professional thing to say, a way of orienting the conversation toward practical matters and away from whatever territory she suspected he was actually interested in. He said that was not why he had asked to see her. He said he wanted to tell her something. Not as a shareholder, not as the person who had just effectively ended her tenure at the company she had led for 9 years. As a man who had, over the course of a long morning, watched something happen that he had watched happen many times before, in many different configurations, over the course of his life. He said he grew up understanding, very early, and very concretely, that there were rooms he would not be allowed into, not because he lacked the ability to contribute to them, but because of assumptions that were made about him before he opened his mouth. He said he had spent a long time being the person in the room who was evaluated before he was heard. He said it had cost him things, opportunities, time, the ordinary ease of professional life that other people moved through without noticing. Because things that are costless are invisible. He said none of that had stopped him, but he wanted her to understand that it had not been nothing. It had been something. It had been significant. He said he was not telling her this to punish her with it. He said he was telling her because he thought she was a person who was capable of understanding it, if she was willing to sit with it long enough to let it actually arrive. He said, "People don't show you who they are in how they treat the people who have power over them. They show you who they are in how they treat the people they believe have none." Angela looked at him across the table. She did not say anything for a moment. The thing she had not been able to name, sitting alone in this room 15 minutes ago, shifted slightly and took on a clearer shape. She recognized it, finally, as a species of grief. Not for the career, not for the position, not for the practical things she had lost today, but for the version of herself she now understood had been visible to everyone except her. For the gap between who she had believed herself to be and what she had actually been doing, day after day, in meeting after meeting, in every interaction where she had held the power and chosen to use it the way she had. She said she was sorry. She said it without qualification, without the conditional architecture she had used on the aircraft, where sorry was wrapped in the implication that the situation had warranted it. She said it simply, in the way that people say things when they have finally set down whatever they were carrying that was making the simple version impossible. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he stood and said he hoped she found her way to whatever came next. He said it with the sincerity of someone who meant it not generously, not performatively, but genuinely, in the quiet register of a person for whom sincerity had never required an audience. He walked out of the conference room and down the corridor and through the lobby of the building, past the reception desk and the arranged chairs and the company's branded signage, and out through the glass doors into the California afternoon. A car was waiting. He got in. The driver pulled away. The employees who saw him leave the receptionist, two marketing coordinators who happened to be crossing the lobby, a facilities manager who had been fixing something near the entrance, watched him go with the specific attentiveness that people give to people whose presence in a building has already communicated, through some atmospheric channel that precedes words, that something significant has occurred. They did not know everything that had happened. They would know more of it by the end of the day. They would know all of it by the following morning, in the particular way that consequential events within organizations become known, spreading through the informal networks that run beneath the official ones. What they saw, in those few seconds of watching Marcus Reed walk through the lobby and out the door, was a man who moved without urgency, without the particular charged quality of someone who has just won something and is still feeling the voltage of it. He walked the way he had sat on the aircraft, simply present, self-contained, finished with a thing that needed to be finished. The receptionist, whose name was Keisha, and who had worked in that building for 3 years, and had on more than one occasion found herself on the receiving end of Angela Whitmore's particular brand of managerial impatience, noticed something about his face as he passed her desk. He did not look triumphant. He did not look satisfied. He looked, she would say later to a colleague, like someone who had done a thing that needed doing and had done it the right way and was now simply moving forward. The day ended. The sun went down over Los Angeles, the way it does with a particular extravagance of color that the city seems to feel it owes the world as compensation for its other qualities. In the conference room on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore Consumer Group building, the board of directors and the general counsel and the CFO were still sitting, working through the mechanics of transition, and the work they were doing was the ordinary, necessary, somewhat tedious work of institutions adjusting themselves to changed circumstances. It was not dramatic. It was the aftermath of drama, which is always less interesting than the thing itself, and also always more important. Angela Whitmore sat in her hotel room that night, with the lights low and her phone on the table, and thought about a great many things. She thought about a flight attendant named Diane. She thought about Priya. She thought about 12 years of quarterly meetings and the faces in those rooms, faces she had looked past, faces she had looked through, faces she had looked at only when they were giving her information she needed, and had looked away from the moment that need was met. She thought about the regional manager in Cincinnati, a man named Gerald, who had been with the company for 11 years, and who had spent 45 minutes in a meeting with her 3 months ago, carefully presenting a logistics improvement plan that he had spent 3 weeks preparing, and she had cut him off after the first 10, and told him to simplify the deck and send it to her assistant. She had not thought about Gerald since that meeting. She thought about him now. She thought about what it cost a person to spend 3 weeks preparing something for an audience that had already decided not to pay attention, and about the particular, quiet discouragement of that experience, and about how many times she had been the person on the other side of exactly that equation, the person whose preparation was rendered invisible by the assumptions of the room, and how she had, apparently, learned entirely the wrong lesson from it. She had learned to perform it from the position of the one doing the ignoring rather than the one being ignored. This seemed, sitting here in the low light with her phone dark on the table, like a very significant failure of imagination. She thought about what Marcus Reed had said and about the way he had said it not to wound her. She was increasingly certain, but simply to leave her with something that was true, in the way that people sometimes offer true things to other people not as weapons, but as provisions for a road that is going to require them. She thought about his face during those few seconds on the aircraft when she had been speaking at him, the particular quality of his stillness, which she had initially read as passivity, but now understood to be something else entirely, something closer to a decision. The decision of a person who has been in that position before, who knows exactly what is happening and exactly what it reveals about the person doing it, and who has chosen, out of some deep and practiced discipline, not to give that person the satisfaction of a reaction that might later be used to reconfigure the meaning of the moment. He had simply let her be exactly what she was. There was something almost generous in that, she thought. And then she thought, no, that was not quite right. It was not generosity. It was dignity. His dignity, which had never required her recognition to exist, and which had remained entirely intact regardless of anything she had said or done in that forward cabin. She did not know what came next. She had spent 20 years always knowing what came next. The not knowing had a texture she was not accustomed to and did not find comfortable, but she sat with it, the way he had suggested long enough to let it actually arrive. She thought that this, the sitting with something difficult, without immediately moving to manage it, might be the beginning of something. She could not have said exactly what. Across the city, in a hotel of his own, quieter, smaller, the kind of place that does not advertise its discretion, because its discretion is itself not advertised. Marcus Reed was finishing the last of the documents he had been reading on the aircraft. He made a note in the margin of one of them, a brief annotation in the small, precise handwriting he had used since his 20s, when a mentor had told him that the discipline of keeping clean records was inseparable from the discipline of clean thinking. He closed the file and set the tablet aside on the nightstand beside a glass of water and a book he had been working through for the past 2 weeks. A biography of a civil engineer who had built infrastructure in underserved communities during the 1960s and who had never been written about before this volume, because the people who write histories tend to write about the people history has already decided to notice, and this man had done his work too quietly and in too many places where no one was watching to have accumulated the kind of visible legacy that attracts attention. Marcus had found the book in a small, independent shop in a city he had visited on business last month and had been reading it slowly, which was how he read things that deserved to be read slowly. He had a call in the morning with his fund's managing partners, and another in the afternoon with the incoming board committee that would oversee the executive transition. There was work to do. There was always work to do. He turned off the lamp on the bedside table and lay in the dark for a moment, as he did every night before sleep, in the ordinary silence of a life that had been built patiently, piece by piece, on the understanding that the most important things take time, and that time, applied with discipline and care and genuine respect for the people around you, eventually tells the truth about everything. Outside, the city moved. In the morning, it would move again. Things would begin that had not begun yet. And somewhere, in the particular invisible machinery of consequence that connects one person's choices to another person's understanding, something had shifted small and real and permanent, the way shifts of that kind always are.